relatively short period of time. I have done this a lot of times before. I think the first time I came to a post-election wrap-up at the Milk Club was 1983. That's pretty amazing. That was Supervisor Vargas wasn't still on the board, but he only recently left the board. That was a long time ago. So I always appreciate coming to the Milk Club and talking about what's going on in the election. And, you know, the first reaction that a lot of people have to this election was, we've got our asses kicked. I mean, not just nationally, and I'm not even going to talk about the national level because I'm not an expert on national politics, although it doesn't stop me from talking. But, you know, on the local level, you know, we on the two things, the two issues that mattered and that were contentious, and that was compost chew and Prop G, we lost. Yes, we passed the minimum wage. It will soon be the highest minimum wage in the country. $15 an hour it goes up to, and that's a wonderful thing. Yes, we passed a housing measure that sets as a policy goal 33% affordable housing, but it's not enforceable. There was no real opposition to those measures. Those were not things that the mayor and Ron Conway and Reid Hoffman and PG&E were against. In fact, one of the interesting trends in this election is the emergence of a new oligarchy in San Francisco. And you saw that in the campaign money. If you look at the campaign money, the SF Ethics website has got a nice graphic presentations. They finally made it to the 21st century. You can actually look at it, and they give you visualizations of where the money is coming from for and against propositions. And you look at all the propositions, and it's pretty clear that the money for everything the mayor wanted was coming from Ron Conway, Reid Hoffman, two tech billionaires, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and a couple of real estate developers. And then the two sons of Don Fisher, who were really interested in putting artificial turf everywhere in the city and getting rid of all the grass. Right? That's their thing. But there was this kind of, I'm never going to call it a kitchen cabinet because I don't think they even talk except through money. There's this group of very, very wealthy people who apparently the current mayor of San Francisco can just call up and say, okay, here's the 5 ballot propositions I want passed, here's the ones I want defeated, write out a check. And that's what happened. There was, $250,000, $300,000 in this barrel slush fund for the propositions that he liked. There was at least $500,000, I haven't counted the final ones, from two people, Ron Conway and Reid Hoffman, 2 guys, to defeat David Cummings. Now, we've seen a lot of, in the past, attacks on progressive candidates. We've seen, as we saw this time around, you know, the National Board of Realtors in Chicago putting $800,000 into Stop Prop G. I don't think I can remember, in the 30-plus years I've been doing this, I don't think I can remember a time when 2 individuals played such an outsized role in financing elections. It's as if we have our own Koch brothers, right? And they're right here in San Francisco, and they're going to spend whatever they need to get their candidates elected, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Interrupt me if you want. So that's one way of looking at the election. And yeah, we lost. I promised the last time I did this, I promised, somebody asked me to promise. I couldn't channel David Letterman, so I'm not going to channel David Letterman, but I am going to channel Gabriel Holland for a second, because he's right. I mean, those of us who go back a long ways know that there were times when we had almost nobody. There were times. The first time I came to the Harvey Milk Club, the president of Harvey Milk Club was a woman named Carol McNeil. Young woman who was just kind of getting her start in politics. We had Harry Red on the Board of Supervisors, and he was always with us. And we had Nancy Walker, our Board of Supervisors, who was with us about 80% of the time. And it dropped off from there. All right? You couldn't get 4 votes for a tenant measure, much less 6. Sometimes you couldn't get 2. Right? Sometimes Harry was there all by himself. And then we went through, in the 90s where we had Tom Aliano and sometimes Sue Bierman. And a lot of times that was it. All right? So now we've got 3 or 4 votes on the Board of Supervisors. We obviously just lost badly on the Board of Supervisors president election. But we've been through this before. And we have lost a lot of elections. Proposition M, the landmark road control measure that really saved San Francisco from the collapse of the early 90s, that was on the ballot 4 times before we won. How many times did we try rent control on the ballot before we finally got something through? I mean, so if you take the long haul, you have to look at elections not just as did we win, but what did we accomplish? I would argue right now that the most important election in my lifetime in San Francisco was an overwhelming loss. Tom Amiano lost to Willie Brown by 18 points. And that was the most important progressive election that I have ever seen. That was the greatest victory for the left in San Francisco in the 32 years that I've been covering the left in San Francisco. And we lost. But what happened is we energized and invigorated an entire generation of San Franciscans. There were a lot of people who got their start in politics in that campaign. And a bunch of them later went on to serve on the Board of Supervisors. You know, there are people like Aaron Peskin, for example, who will say to this day that what got him convinced he should run for the Board of Supervisors was working on Tom Amiano's 1999 writing campaign. Right? So that was a loss. All right? But it was a huge win because it did something else. What it did was it created an organization. Right? And the Amiano for Mayor campaign. By the way, I believe the campaign manager of the Amiano for Mayor campaign in 1999 was Gabriel.
I was the writing campaign.
The writing campaign. The writing campaign in 1999. Gabriel was the campaign manager for the writing campaign. Is that the first electoral campaign?
Yeah, it was, well, I worked on the writing poll.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But, so,
and just to give you some context, we had our campaign office out of Joseph's Juice Joint, which was a cabaret, and we had to close down the campaign office at 7 o'clock because they had performances. And the opposition spent, some of the other opposing candidates spent up to $4 million, and we spent $25,000 and everyone and got a comment in the room. Now, the downside of that was we didn't have an infrastructure for absentee voting in our scenario. That said,
so many people who are now active in San Francisco politics, and here
Eric
are
Peskin got to start putting up signs for Tom Amiano, literally putting signs up by himself.
Yeah, I mean, this
was
was the starting point for an entire generation of San Francisco progressive political leaders, right? And everybody walked out of that campaign feeling good. We felt like we lost, but it was such a long shot to begin with. And the whole concept that we had done a writing campaign got this guy into a runoff against Willie Brown. And actually,
do you think, Tim, that part of it was at the start contracts?
and
that set in motion.
It was two things, I think. It was a stark contrast. It was also, Tom put his finger on something that was seething underneath San Francisco. And that was, remember, this is a period when we were starting to see the last round of real estate bubble and huge rent increases and evictions. And this feeling that San Francisco was not being run democratically, that there was an oligarchic power structure in place that at that time was mostly real estate developers. And the mayor would do anything that they said, and people didn't feel represented. So there were people who were not specifically fans of Tom Amiano. There were people who were way more conservative than Tom was, who came out and worked for him and voted for him because they were so sick of the way things are going at City Hall, right? So let me fast forward to today, right? The Compost campaign did a couple of things, right? First of all, it did energize an awful lot of people. There were 500 people out on election day working for David Compost. And they're not gone. Those people are still around. They were all told, Mike Casey says that with the labor people and the IE and the Compost campaign, there were 1,000 volunteers. That's a huge number of people in San Francisco for an election. Right? And that infrastructure, those people are still around, right? Still around for the next campaign, whatever it may be. Part of what happened was there was an extraordinary, and again, unusual, alliance between labor and the progressive community. Not that labor and the progressive community are always aligned, but they are always, right? And to see how closely the labor folks, the progressive unions, the hotel workers union, 1021, the nurses, the labor folks working with community people on the Compost campaign was a really important landmark. Now, we're starting to see this more around the Bay Area and around the country. We saw the same thing in Richmond, where Gabriel can talk more about this, but what happened in Richmond was 1021, local 1021, labor people working with environmentalists, and you don't always see that happening, right? You don't always see that happening. Working with environmentalists against Chevron, shut down all of Chevron's candidates, right? So the connection between progressive labor and the progressive community was strengthened by this campaign in San Francisco. And that's something that we can look forward to in the future. And that's something we can really think about. I don't know what the mayor's race is going to be, and it could be really tricky, depending on, Mark Leno against Ed Lee. I don't know where everybody comes down. But that's not set in stone yet, by the way. That is not set in stone yet. That, whatever Randy Shaw says, there's still an awful lot of pieces to be put into that puzzle before we can declare what this mayor's race is. Okay? But we have those alliances, and that's really important. The other thing that I want to say about the compost campaign is that, and Prop G to a certain extent, is that we showed that grassroots works. The Prop G campaign, right? I don't know if you've looked at the numbers. They were outspent like $1 million to $30,000. I mean, I really don't, I think in the end they probably had $30,000 or $40,000 against well over $1 million. And the thing came in like 4 points behind, right? Yeah. So, and that was all grassroots. That was all people, some of them new to the tenant movement, going out and knocking on doors and hanging signs. And it was astonishing how close we were, considering what we're up against. Okay? That's a really important thing. Why did that happen? Well, if you look at the numbers, Prop G did not just get votes in the, what they call the progressive donut, right? District 5 and District 6 and District 9. Prop G got votes all over the city. Didn't win all over the city, but got votes all over the city because there is in San Francisco right now, as there was in 1999, there's this moment of opportunity where I think there's a tremendous dissatisfaction among the voting populace. People say, oh, the mayor's approval rates are so high. When you actually drill down and look at real poll numbers, the mayor's approval rates are not that high because people don't approve the direction the city's going in. Right? More than 60%, almost 65% of the city is still tenants. There is not a tenant in San Francisco who is happy with the way things are going down in San Francisco. Because if you haven't gotten an eviction notice, you go to bed every night wondering what you got. Okay? So you've got the same kind of seething discontent we had in 1999. And you combine this with the increasingly apparent and increasingly visible fact that a handful of very rich tech people are running the city. And you've got the recipe for people to say, wait a minute, I've had enough. I've had enough. All right? So, that said, the other lesson I take from this election, and that we all have to take from this election going into the mayor's campaign, and there will be a mayor's race. Ed Lee is not going to wind up unopposed. And I don't know if there's just going to be one candidate or there's going to be a bunch of them, but there will be an opponent. Probably multiple opponents. One of the things that we have to take into that and into future campaigns is the idea that the electorate in San Francisco has changed dramatically. And I'm not talking about how it's gotten more conservative because rich people and tech people have moved in. Yes, rich people have moved in. The Haight-Ashbury in the last 25 years has been absolutely, completely transformed economically. The socioeconomics of the Haight have changed dramatically. The voting pattern hasn't changed that much. Right? District 5 still votes very progressive, despite the fact that there's a lot more rich people who have moved in there. That's not what, and the tech people so far are voting. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is people don't vote on election day anymore. Okay? 60% of the vote in this election was cast before election day. So the traditional kind of campaigns that we're all used to doing in the grassroots, which is get everybody up on election day, get them out on the streets, knock on doors, do door hangers, get people to the polls, doesn't work anymore. It doesn't mean that you don't do that, but you have to start thinking that election day starts a month before the election. And all of us on the left have to start thinking that way. And we have to start thinking that we have to get our voters to the polls early. And we have to find voters who don't show up in every election. People who only vote one out of every 2, 3, once or twice every 5 elections, who are not regular voters. We've got to get them. We've got to get them signed up as absentees. If there are folks, we've got to get them to the polls. The other thing we've got to do is register more voters. Right? So we have to think about if the turnout in San Francisco had been 6% higher, David Campos would have won. If it had been 10% higher, he would have won going away. All right? That's part of what our message is. And we can still win these elections, and grassroots still works. And we were very, very effective at what we did. Now we have to take that coalition, and we have to learn the lessons and move forward with a little bit of strategy. All right, and think about what's going to come next. What's coming up, as I say, enemy will have an opponent. I know there's a lot of people thinking about the race, and there's probably a lot of backroom discussions going on. If Mark Leno runs and wins, his state senate seat will be open. That will be a contested race. If Tom Amiano doesn't run for mayor, we might very well win for that seat. Right? If not, in 2 years, Mark Leno was turned out anyway, and that seat will open up. There will be a contested race for that seat. On the ballot this fall, there will probably be an attempt to repeal Prop M. I am seeing that. If you read the Business Times, the real estate websites, they're all talking about finding a way to adjust, repeal Prop M. That's likely to be on the ballot. There will absolutely be an Airbnb initiative on the ballot. I'm not sure if it's going to be exactly the one that we had in the fall. Some people would like to have more input in, or it's going to be a different one. There will be an Airbnb initiative, something about shared economy on the ballot. Right? There may very well be a reprise of Prop G on the ballot, with slight changes, a couple of tweaks here and there, maybe change some of the percentages, do it a little bit different, but let's go back and try that again during the mayor's race and make the mayoral candidacy. All of those things are going to happen. So the key for us now, as the progressive left, is to get up and dust ourselves off. Yeah, we lost a couple of elections, but we built a lot, and we have to keep building on that. You can't, it's not all about winning or losing the last election. It's about building a movement that can continue to move forward and that can take advantage of an extraordinary time in San Francisco history when people across the board, not just, the old commie hippies like me, but people across the board are very dissatisfied with what they see going on in their city. They don't think it's their city anymore, and that message is very powerful, and they're afraid they aren't going to be able to live here anymore, and that message is very powerful. Right? I was at Campus State yesterday when Lennar and the mayor announced they're building a new shopping mall. In fact, Kofi Bonner from Lennar stood up and said, "I see the future in shopping for all." Right? Gucci and Armani, and they're going to build a shopping mall there. But one of the things that the mayor said is, oh, well, we're going to be building 6,000 new units of housing, and a third of it's going to be affordable, and we're going to create 3,000 jobs. And I asked him, a lot of those jobs are going to be in retail. Retail doesn't pay very well. Will those jobs pay enough for someone to live in San Francisco? And he said, oh, we passed the minimum wage law. I supported the minimum wage law. I think this is great. I think it's great that labor and community leaders are going around and doing what Washington will and Sacramento will, and doing it city by city. But a $15 an hour minimum wage is around $31,500 a year. And in order to purchase or rent the median home in San Francisco, you need about 4 times that income. So even if 2 people working at Gucci, earning the minimum wage, working 40 hours a week, with no kids, decide to live together in a studio or one-bedroom apartment, they're only halfway there with the new minimum wage that we passed. Right? So we've got to start thinking, that's not enough. A policy measure to say that maybe 30% of the housing in San Francisco ought to be affordable, that's not enough. And now is a time when I think people are open to that message. So I'm walking away from this election eyes open, not unwilling to recognize mistakes that we all made, things that we could have done better. Every election, every time you lose, you learn something from it. There are things we could have done better, but also very hopeful of what we built and what we can build on that and what we can do moving forward into 2015 and beyond, because the battle for the city of San Francisco continues. My son, who's 15, worked on the compost campaign. He was a volunteer. He went every weekend. He went after school. He got up on weekends early in the morning and went out and walked precincts, and he worked really hard on it. And, he really got his heart in it. And he was asleep when I came home election night. He woke me up early the next morning, "Dad, did compost win? Did compost win?" And I said, "Well, it doesn't look like it." And he was really sad. And I said, "You know what? You got to get up and you got to realize, as anybody who's been in the labor movement knows, the struggle continues. It's not one election. Right? We're not going to win them all." When the Guardian sued our competitor years ago, our attorney, who had been an amateur boxer before that, told me a trial is just like a boxing match. You're going to take some hits. right? The best case you have, it doesn't matter, you're gonna get knocked down. The other side is gonna come and hit you with stuff that you don't expect. And what you gotta do if you're gonna win is get yourself up, learn your lesson, and move forward. And if you can keep on doing that, then you get fewer losses and more victories. And that's, I've talked way more than I meant to, so I'll stop there. Questions? Thoughts? Would like to know? Yeah.
I appreciate very much what you say. I've been going at it since 1973, and like you say, you win some, you lose some. And what I learned on the campus campaign was incredible. Met a bunch of wonderful people. I learned a lot. I used to wonder what happened to the left. You know, it wasn't visible. Well, I saw it. And like you say, what was built. And I hope other people feel this way. I'm bruised, but I'm not broken.
Yeah, exactly right. And you know what? The most important thing that you said to me was you learned a lot on the compost campaign. I think there's a lot of young people. One of the amazing things, hanging around the compost campaign headquarters, going down there, was how many kids there were. And I say that in a very kind way as an old man who's now 56 years old. I say that there were a lot of very young people working on that campaign. It wasn't just, you know, it wasn't just people my age who'd been around in San Francisco all this time. There were young people who were relatively new to politics, along with people like you and me who are veterans of many, many, many campaigns. That's really encouraging. That's great. That's what we want. You know, we want to bring new people into politics. And to do that, you need a cause that matters, and you need a candidate that you can get behind. And we had both of those with David Campos. By the way, David's not going anywhere. He's going to be our supervisor for the next 2 years. He's got a bright political future. We're going to be working for David Campos for something else soon enough, whether it's David Campos for mayor or David Campos for state senator, whatever it is going to be. David Campos, I honestly believe, has a future in this town. He doesn't go anywhere. And remember, Harvey lost his state assembly race too, first time.
Yeah. Other questions, thoughts?
Tim, I agree with what you're saying about both movement building as well as the new techniques we really have to improve upon. One interesting thing that came up was about 10,000 people in the 17th Assembly race voted but did not vote in that particular Assembly race.
Yep.
So it really sort of brings out the issue of negativity and mailers and people just throwing up their hands. And people toward the end that I was knocking on doors that were often saying, I mean, I was getting a lot of good reception up until the end, but also people were saying, you know, I'm just tired of all of this. I've had enough of this assembly race. So if you want to comment on that.
It is, you know, it's true. And I know the labor folks who did the pro-compost ID are thinking this through. Did we go too negative? Did we make this? There were more flyers that I got saying David Chu is a Republican and a bad guy than flyers that I got saying David Campos is a good guy. Now, some of that, they will say strategically, when you're going after somebody who has a higher name recognition, a higher profile, the president of the Board of Supervisors had recently run for mayor, starts off 10 points ahead in the polls. Part of what you have to do is knock him down. And you have to explain to people that this guy is not what he appears to be. But we may have gone overboard, particularly since their entire campaign was David Campos is horrible. So you get these flyers in the mail, this guy's a jerk, this guy's a jerk, this guy's a jerk, this guy's a jerk. At a certain point, people who don't know much about politics are going to say, why should I vote for either one? There's two jerks running, why should I vote for either one? So there was a lot of drop-off. There was a lot of people who voted and didn't vote for either candidate. Again, that's partially, you know, partially our fault for not identifying those voters and making sure that they were voting for our causes and our people. But part of, you know, interestingly, there are quite a few precincts in the city where Prop G got more votes than Campos. They're not places where Chu won. And this is not, I'm not talking about Chinatown, where the Chinese Tennis Association got a lot of people out who voted yes on G and for David Chu. I'm talking about places in the Haight and the Mission and the Castro, where Prop G got more votes than either assembly candidate. Which is interesting, and that tends to go to what you're saying. Strategically, we need to think about how soon and how hard we go negative, and when it's better to just talk about how good our person is and not just how bad the other person is. So I don't really, you know, I don't know the psychology of that, and I think it's going to take more analysis, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it was funny when we did our Sunday or Saturday school and Sunday Saturday something, but there actually for the leftovers, I think a lot of you remember this window where there was a leader sign and then a Prop G sign.
Yeah. Yes.
But the thing I always think about, and I think a lot of us all think about, is like, how do we get the time? Like, if you look at it, just like tea specifically, and that cross-pollination between the tennis movement and like the Milk Club, and like that, the tennis movement was even visible outside of like a few handful of organizations, I think was a really new thing for San Francisco, for the first since the 90s. And I think there's like that question of how do we buy ourselves time if we're not going to love money. So moving forward to the next election, like how are we going to make these coalitions so that it's so common sense for everyone to vote yes on TV and it really is
It's a big challenge. The voters who vote in, one or two out of 5 elections, trying to go out there and get new people registered, trying to get our absentees to the polls early, which is something that the Chew campaign definitely did. They definitely did. That's expensive. It's expensive because if you want to do an absentee voter campaign, first you have to find the person, particularly somebody who doesn't vote in every election. You have to make sure they're still there. You have to make sure they get an absentee ballot. You have to make sure they fill out the absentee ballot, and you got to make sure they drop it in the mail. All right? And this is a lot of voter contact. It's less expensive, just purely in terms of volunteer effort. I'm not talking about money now, I'm talking about because time is money. Right? Volunteer effort is resources. It takes less resources to have one group of people go out on one day and get people to the polls who haven't voted yet than it does to contact those same people 3 or 4 times to get them registered, get them an absentee ballot, get them out to make sure they fill it out. Right? So how do we get that done? I mean, one of the problems, of course, that the left is facing in the city, and this is nothing new to any of you, is we all have to work all the damn time. Right? I mean, when I came to San Francisco, I don't want to be old and nostalgic, but when I came to San Francisco, most of the people I knew did not work full-time. Most of my friends were performers, musicians, artists, poets, photographers, people who did art, writers, and worked 20 or 30 hours a week to pay the rent. And you could do that. You could actually do that. And there was more music and art flowering back then. And also, people had more time for politics. Right? The anti-nuclear movement came out of San Francisco. The fight against Diablo Canyon involved tens of thousands of hours of meetings that people couldn't go to if they were working 60 hours a week. I mean, that partially limited the movement, but it also said that there were a lot of people who could do that. We're all working so hard to pay the rent now that it's hard to get that time. So that's an organizing challenge. It's an organizing challenge, part of the problem of the housing situation in San Francisco. Mike Casey will tell you, having the hotel workers union, it's hard for him to get people to rally out to work because half of them live in Antioch now because his workers can't afford to live in the city. So all of these are challenges, and that's something that we need to think about at the beginning of the campaign. How do we get the time? Because we're not going to be able to match them dollar for dollar. You can't run a campaign in San Francisco without somebody. You have to have the base of what you need. But then we got to think about that organizationally. Who are going to be our volunteers, and when and how are we going to find the human capital and the human resources to do this? Because it's expensive. I agree with you.
Money out of politics.
Questions?
So what do you think about our new board president?
Well,
what's going to happen?
I think that John Avalos was talking about House of Cards before the board meeting went down.